What do you get when you combine monumental speed with monumental aggression? Add in a barrel full of state-owned oil money, and you get possibly one of the most controversial drivers in Formula One history. I'm Nedzo, and I'm here with Peter Brook, and today we'll be discussing possibly one of the most controversial drivers in F1 history, Pastor Maldonado. I think he could have been a future world champion, but most people don't. So we'll get to talking about his career.
This is the DRS train.
Hey, Peter.
Hello. Yes, you've got an interesting job on your hands to try and defend the honour of good old Crash Door Maldonado. Interesting driver, someone people remember really more as a meme rather than anything else, but also a bit of a paradox, because outside of the incessant crashing that was quite kind of comical and he became very notorious of, he had these just occasional breakout moments, of course, most obvious being his win in Spain in 2012. For the most part, a fairly respectable junior career as well. So he's kind of a complex one, because he's not like other drivers there have been in the past, where you could point to that are similar, such as, say, Andrea de Cesaris. He's kind of like Andrea de Cesaris if de Cesaris wasn't completely useless, is one of the best ways of putting it, I think.
Maybe de Cesaris if he'd have actually won at Long Beach in 1982, because he got on pole there, led for 32 laps, and then crashed while leading. So maybe if he'd have won that, it'd have been quite comparable. But yeah, as I said, as you said, he did have a fairly respectable junior career. He hopped around quite a few series for quite a few years and got into F1 fairly late for modern standards. He got in when he was like 26, 27. He spent several years in the lower like 2-liter formulas, and then he spent a year in Formula Renault 3.5 in 2006, and then 3.5 years in GP2, eventually winning it in 2010. And he beat guys who would later go on to have good reputations. Sergio Perez beat him; he was second. Jules Bianchi was third, and I mean he got that on merit. So yes, he was a third season champion, which are often frowned upon in the junior series. Which is a fun fact, by the way. He is the only third season champion or more in Formula 2 or GP2 history who's won a race in Formula 1.
I mean, yeah, GP2 and, well, what is now Formula 2 is an interesting one, because it's just it's such a free-for-all and a bit of a gamble in terms of cars and blah, 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 that it's almost very hard to read too much into it. But yeah, I suppose for people that have been around that time, I mean, more recently we saw Drugovich, I think, was third season when he took the title, Pourchaire second or third.
He was also
yeah, it can take a little while, and I suppose he's one of the ones that at least made it to Formula One, because, well, Fabio Lima and Davide Valsecchi never did. Who knows with Drugovich? Pourchaire, I think that bridge has been burned. There's probably another one in there I've forgotten that hasn't done it.
Palmer.
Who?
Jolyon Palmer. He got to he got.
Well, no, he did get to Formula One. He wasn't very good, but he still made it there.
I mean,
yeah,
Giorgio Pantano won a GP2 title 4 years after his F1 debut. So,
yeah, well, his career ran in reverse because he's now a karting instructor. So he's like Roberto Merri. He's just Benjamin Button. He's just going backwards.
Yes.
But for Maldonado, I mean, yeah, 7 years in single seaters is, I suppose, a relatively long time, because I don't think a lot of people realize he did his first Formula One test in a Minardi in 2004. So a full 7 years before he actually made it to Formula One, and that is a long way in advance to test a car. And that was in only his second season as well in single seaters. So that's he's not a name that would have been on people's radar. I mean, we knew about him when he got signed, and because the year before he got to Formula One, he tested with HRT in Abu Dhabi, and unsurprisingly said no to a seat with them, even though I'm sure they would have loved to have had his money from PDVSA on their car, but wasn't the case. But yeah, there have been some highs, but also quite a lot of lows at the same time.
Yeah, do we want to start with we'll start with his Formula One career? Surprisingly, the 2011 season. So he goes into Williams, which, although it's a storied operation, we all know that how much Williams has won, but we also know how much they haven't won since the late 90s. They were 7 years without a win. They'd not had even a podium since Rosberg was with them in the late noughties. And it was clear that they were on a downward spiral. They'd lost Toyota engines, had to stick with Cosworths. And they brought in, before the season before, they had Barrichello and Hulkenberg. They had an experienced pair of hands in Barrichello. You can't go wrong with him. Very sensible, very knowledgeable. I'm not sure if he was the most experienced driver in F1 history at that point because because I'm not sure when Schumacher's numbers actually were in 2010, but he was one of those names that were right up there in terms of starts, and obviously Hulkenberg had a fairly decent rookie season, had that pole in Interlagos, but got booted out, had to take refuge at Force India because Maldonado bought money from PDVSA, the Venezuelan state-owned oil company that he brought on. And his career started off, I mean, it took him a few races to get going. I'll be honest. I believe he out-qualified Barrichello in his first race. If not, he was very close to him. If I quickly pull up my stat sheet here, he was 0.028 seconds off of Barrichello in his first qualifying session and then retired with some sort of mechanical issue in the race. He had the same problem in Malaysia, but I believe he spun out because, of course, he did. He would have those moments where he just spin out of races. It took him until Spain to properly get going. And this is a race that is one, in my opinion, one of his better ones, and we can get into that if you know anything about it. Please indulge me.
Spain 2011.
Yes.
He finished 15th. The race itself wasn't the most eventful from what I can remember. A lot of what I can remember is from HRT, having gone over that race over and over again with backmarker teams. I'm not even sure Vettel. I think was it Webber that won it? Or
I'll be honest, I don't know who won it, if I'm being frankly honest.
Vettel is touch and go with Barcelona, but yeah.
What I do know is Maldonado qualified in 9th place in that race. He was his first ever Q3 appearance. We all know how bad the 2011 Williams was. I think it's fair to say it was, the 9th quickest car? Was that fair to say?
I mean, hovering around, probably worse than the Toro Rosso, but
yes,
at the bottom end of the midfield above the back three teams.
Obviously, I have a stat sheet where I update drivers like career stats, and if they progress to a session that their teammate didn't progress to, I just take it from the earlier session both drivers were in. And in that Spain race, he outqualified Barrichello by 3.5 seconds. Now, I've seen in some reports that he was impeded and stuff like that, but I don't think impeding is 3.5 seconds, and especially considering he ended up beating Barrichello by a considerable margin in the race. I think that this is one of Maldonado's better performances. He obviously, to qualify 9th in a car that is 9th quickest, should be on the 9th row rather than on the 4th or 5th row, is pretty impressive. But then the race after that was Monaco, which was another one of his fantastic performances. He gets the exact same qualifying position, 9th. Barrichello was further up. I believe that he was 12th on the grid. But then in the race is the part where most people thought he not necessarily came of age, but because Spain was quite quiet and he dropped down the field from his qualifying position. But in the race, he actually started to show some good form and potential.
So, couple of things. Yeah, so Barrichello had become most experienced driver. It was Turkey 2008 when he got that record, took it over from Riccardo Patrese. So Michael never got near that record. Yes. Yeah, that 3.5 second gap in qualifying. I'm thinking something was not working for Barrichello because he was beaten by a Lotus and was only 0.3 in front of the other Lotus, and there was a fairly significant gap between them, version HRT, and everybody else. But even so, yeah, I mean, in Q1 to be only a second off, Schumacher got the fastest time. Monaco is that race is a funny one because it was red flagged at the end because there was that enormous crash with 4 or 5 drivers that just kind of was a very, very strange accident that just kind of came out of nowhere and was just backmarkers getting in the way of leaders and everything. And he had that collision, the first of many collisions with Lewis that took Lewis out. Well, it took both of them out because I don't think he finished either.
Lewis did finish. Lewis finished 7th in the place that Maldonado was in before.
Maldonado went into the wall, didn't he, at Sandovo?
Yes.
And they were, although that being said, he was being lapped, so I don't think they were in contention for points in that race. Because Lewis, because
that was a position. That was a position.
Yeah, no. They had both been lapped or almost been lapped before the red flag.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Well, yeah, because in the crash that happened, it was now I can remember it. It was I think it was Maldonado. He passed Satil at Tabac, and then
Yes.
Satil hit the wall. Lewis was behind them, but then the race leaders like Vettel, Webber, and Alonso were about to lap them and were right behind.
Yes.
And so then he hit the wall and he goes off, and then it just, there's Al-Jawsari, Petrov, everyone else is involved in all of that. So he sort of triggered that with that move because, I mean, as we all know, overtaking is not easy at Monaco. Tabac is not it's not the easiest corner to overtake at, even so. I mean, he tried it again in 2013. We'll get to that
I knew you
later.
were going to mention that. But,
yeah, I don't know if they were because I know that earlier on in that race, Lewis had also come together with Massa at the Lowe's hairpin, so he was having a bit of a mare. But he was
3 incidents that race.
Yeah. It was not 2011 in general was not a good year for Lewis. But yeah, so he was getting involved and all of that, but it just didn't work out at the very end.
Yeah, I mean, that incident with Hamilton, that incident came after the red flag. The red flag was on like lap 66, 67, I believe. And the incident with Maldonado came on lap 74. So it was literally like with the last couple of laps to go. And the steward said it was Lewis's fault, gave him a 20-second time penalty because he essentially, people say Maldonado was weaving on the straight to try and stop Lewis from getting by. I don't see that in the replay. I see he was moving a little bit, but it's the banana main straight at Monaco. You're going to not follow a perfectly straight line going around that curved straight. I think Martin Brundle used to call it a banana straight because it was essentially not straight. And Lewis essentially, he didn't send it up the inside. It wasn't a crazy dive bomb, but it was like front wing to like just ahead of a rear wheel. It was never going to work. Sandoval, you just don't do that. And Maldonado turned in. They made contact, and Maldonado got dropped out of what would have been 7th place. So he would have scored 6 points, which when you look at the total Williams points total from 2011, 5 points, that would have been a big. I don't think it would have moved up any positions because I think Toro Rosso and co were well far ahead of that. But it would have put him ahead of Barrichello in the point standings, and it would have done a lot of good for his season. After that, I mean, Canada, the chaotic 2011 Canadian Grand Prix, he spun out of that pretty early on, I believe, although he did qualify in 12th, which again, pretty decent result. He didn't have the greatest race in Valencia. He was about 40 seconds off of Barrichello. I'm not sure if he just didn't feel something with the car because he qualified behind him as well. Silverstone, he qualified 7th again, or his highest grid spot of the year in 7th, but then ran outside the points. Hockenheim, it was a similar story where he outqualified Barrichello, but an anonymous drive to 14th. Hungary, that was a poor race. He was outqualified by 3/4 of a second by Barrichello, and then 3/4 of a minute he lost in the race. But then in Belgium, he got his only point of what would end up being his only point of the season in that race.
There seems to be a recurring theme here of him qualifying well and then just kind of going backwards in the races, not necessarily from if there's a race where he made mistakes. And I'm thinking this was the first year of the super soft Pirelli tires, and maybe Williams weren't good at managing them, or their strategies were garbage, or whatever. Because everyone that year had to be especially gentle with their tires to make them work, and it created quite large gaps in race performance in a much stronger degree than what we have now, even though today it's still a case of just constant tyre saving. But if you do it properly, the tyres will actually last, when back then almost every race was a 3 or 4 stopper.
Yeah. To be honest, I do think there is a lot of credit to that, because it was just maybe it was the case that Williams was. I think it was more of a case that Williams was just a bad car. Don't get me wrong, any really good driver can pull out a massive qualifying lap, but we've seen with Verstappen this year, it's a lot easier to qualify on pole than it is to maintain a lead for the entire race. I mean, the only real counter argument to that is Alonso in 2012, where he got no dry weather pole positions, yet he got loads of wins. But it is generally perceived that if you're in a bad car, it's easier to qualify well than it is to race well consistently in terms of positions and stuff like that. I mean, that Belgium race, I kept thinking that was a race where Alonso ploughed into the side of Barrichello, but that was 2010. I can't really think of the only thing I remember about the 2011 race was Schumacher coming from the back and Lewis Hamilton clashing with Kobayashi. That was it.
It had the beginning of Spa. There were a few shunts on the first lap. A couple of Lotuses. I think Al-Jawsari got taken out as well. But it's not really the races. The 2010 and 2012 races were generally more eventful ones. But that one, yes, he finally got a point. That one. The collision with Lewis in qualifying is what a lot of people remember.
I forgot about that, I'll be honest.
Yeah.
So most people don't know the context behind that. So yes, Maldonado swerved across Lewis after their laps have been completed, which obviously, in any sense, in any context, is irreprehensible, and you shouldn't be doing that. But most people don't realise that if you look at the clip, what happens before, you know how when everyone's queuing up for their laps in qualifying, that everyone usually stays in line and they let everyone else, let the guy in front of them pull him, go off and do their lap, and then you wait a few seconds and then you let then you go off and do your lap. But what Lewis did was at the bus stop chicane, midway through the bus stop chicane, not even like on approach or in the first part of it, on the middle of the bus stop chicane, he pulls alongside Pastor, shoves him off to the edge of the circuit, and like breaks the quote unquote gentleman's agreement that they have. Now, I'm not, as I said, I'm not saying that you should then take retribution on track and hit someone after their qualifying lap, because that's not what Formula One's about. There's other racing series that are for intentional retaliations. But in my opinion, I'm not sure if Maldonado got any actual penalty for that, but I know Lewis only got a warning for his initial impeding, which is what they called it. I don't remember if Maldonado got a penalty. If he didn't, then obviously it's fair. Both of them got a warning. But if Maldonado got a penalty, I believe that Lewis should have also got a penalty for impeding him, because it was a dick move to essentially just force him off the circuit.
Yeah, there's kind of faults to be found with both of them there, but it's just that normally, and again, this has been a discussion with what happened in Spain not that long ago, that if you were that deliberately driving into someone should warrant a fairly stiff penalty, and it seems he just didn't get one for that.
Yeah. After that point, this is in the 2011 season, he kind of hit a stride. There was a streak of 3 consecutive races at Monza, at Singapore, and at Japan, Suzuka, where he out-qualified Barrichello in... Actually, no, he didn't out-qualify Barrichello in any of them, but he did out-race him. He got 2 11th places, which is fairly impressive considering the car he was in, and he out-raced Barrichello in all of them. Gaps of about 10 to 15 seconds. Not absolute blitz jobs, not absolutely destroying him, but fairly respectable. He retires in Korea and India, although I haven't got the reasons why exactly right here, but I don't think he crashed out of those. Finishes behind Barrichello in Abu Dhabi, although there was some weird thing because I'm not seeing any difference in the qualifying delta, and he somehow qualified ahead of him. It might have been that Barrichello started from the back. And then in Brazil, he qualifies right near the back and then fails to do anything in the race. But he had I think he may have crashed out of that one, actually. So across 2011, he actually out-qualified Barrichello on average. He was on average a tenth and a bit quicker, on average 0.0119 seconds quicker in qualifying, which again is not a massive margin, but it is still a decent one. And in the races, he's on average 1.9 behind in the races, which again is not horrendous. A lot of people like to, because we'll look at Pastor's gaps to his teammates in later years, and some of them are less representative, and some people think that Barrichello wasn't a representative teammate. What most people don't realize is that Rubens didn't want to retire at the end of 2011. He wanted to stay on until 2012, and he thought that was what was going to happen. But in January 2012, he got a call from Sir Frank Williams saying he was dropped for Bruno Senna. Now, obviously, Rubens was 39 in 2011, which is fairly old for a Formula One driver, but it's not against the realm of possibilities that a 39-year-old Formula One driver is still a decent driver. I don't think he was at his peak like he was in the late 90s, the early 2000s, but he was still a very, very good driver, and someone who I believe would have shown himself to be good in any midfield team, maybe even as a number 2 driver in a top team, even still in his later years. I'm not sure what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, Barrichello, I think you could say was past his best, but I mean, 39 these days is still relatively young to still be racing. I mean, because Lewis and Alonso are into their 40s and they've gone off a bit, but for the most part they're still driving perfectly well. I mean, Hülkenberg is 37, 38, so he's nearly at that stage too. And yeah, Barrichello is he's a good benchmark for anyone, because at the time, he was the most experienced driver in Formula One. He spent 6 years alongside Michael. Even if he had to sort of fight him with one hand behind his back, you learn a lot from that. and Maldonado himself said this, that he learned loads from him and kind of really enjoyed being his teammate, but they were both just limited by the car they had, because Barrichello got 2 ninth places in it. Had Maldonado not had the collision in Monaco, he would have ended up outscoring him and beating his best result. Because by the end of the day, it would have made no difference to the constructors. They got 5 points, whereas Toro Rosso got like 41.
Yes.
So it was one of those ones where it's just a big imbalance in the midfield. That meant they often weren't really fighting anyone properly, because they were too far ahead of the back 3 teams, but they're not really competing enough with the rest of them. But yeah, Barrichello didn't want to leave, and I don't think Maldonado wanted him to leave either, because he was enjoying it, and he's like, okay, I guess we're bringing in Bruno, and he's done well. They thought, okay, well, he's done half a dozen races with Lotus, Renault, and been okay, so we'll throw him in. And also, he's a Senna, and we've had a Senna drive for us before, and look how that went. And so let's try it again. I don't know. It just wasn't. It wasn't what necessarily the most ideal circumstance for him. But then he's the kind of person I think who would just take on any comers, to be honest.
Yeah. The thing is with Bruno, again, this is the getting into the argument that that a lot of people have with Maldonado's teammates being not representative. I mean, Bruno had some good moments in 2011. I remember we talked about Belgium, where there was incidents at the start. He was involved in them. He qualified 7th in a Lotus Renault. I don't remember where, because he took over from Heidfeld, not Petrov, when arguably Heidfeld was a better driver, or pretty much inarguably Heidfeld was a better driver than Petrov. I'm not sure where Petrov qualified in that race, because he was also a topsy-turvy driver. Like, sometimes he'd be right up in the top 10, and other times he'd be down in like 17th. But Senna on his day was a really good driver. I think he lacked a bit of raw pace, but he could still qualify quite highly. As I said, we saw that in 2011. I think most of the time he wasn't on that level. He was one of those inconsistent drivers, I believe. And I think we saw that in what would end up being, in terms of impact, definitely Pastor's best season. 2012, Australia, the first race of the season. We'll get into the nooks of it just now, because while Pastor was fighting Alonso for 5th place on the final lap, Bruno, he finished, I believe, 16th place, which was, and he qualified. He got knocked out in Q2. Maldonado he'd qualified into Q3, got up into Q3, and I'm not sure if he was one of the guys who benefited from a safety car particularly. I can't exactly remember, but he was fighting Alonso for 5th place, and yes, he did make the mistake. He dropped it on the exit at turn 6, spun into the barrier, lost all the points. But the fact he was even in that position in the first place, he showed he had a lot of pace in the bank.
Yeah, this is something, a sort of recurring theme amongst 2012, because the win, which we will get to, seems to be a bit of an outlier, that Senna was more consistent than Maldonado, but there were often some quite significant pace gaps between the two. And a lot of the races where Maldonado was doing well were ones where Senna was like at the back end of the midfield or whatever. There are very few examples of both of them making it to Q3 and running in the points and being competitive. But then Maldonado is just so lopsided, because more than half of his points that year came from that win. And there were, he scored points on only 4 other occasions, and had some races where he qualified well and maybe the car broke down or something went wrong. But then there were just so many races where the pace was non-existent.
This is something... Oh, carry on.
Whereas Bruno Senna scored points actually more often than he didn't, interestingly enough. But none of them, only on a few occasions did they both score points together.
Yeah. I will just address some of those points. So in Malaysia, he was running in the points when he got some sort of, I think it was like an engine failure with like 2 laps to go. He was only running in like 9th or 10th, so it wouldn't have been major points. He lost out to Senna on merit in China. That was a very strange race, I believe, for the tyre strategy, because that was a race where Raikkonen went from 2nd to, I believe it was 12th in 1.5 laps. That was when the Pirellis were like, apart from maybe some parts of 2013, at their biggest sort of cheese era in terms of like how they just fall off over 1 lap and just disintegrate in terms of performance. After that came Bahrain, where he, I believe, had some sort of issue in Q2, qualified right near the back, and then had a puncture in the race going over a curb and spun out. That spin was actually caught on the intro of the F1 2012 game.
But they replicated a lot of historic moments from that season in game, because the camera angle that caught it was quite distinctive.
Yes, and then you get to Spain. I'll let you begin this one.
Okay, so Spain is an interesting one because there are a few prevailing conspiracy theories regarding this. So it wasn't the only race where he qualified well. Strictly speaking, on paper, he was 16th. There had been, in practice, he had shown reasonable pace, but not necessarily outstanding. It looked like it might be a fairly competitive circuit for them. Senna had, I think he had, he either made a mistake or had some kind of power failure in Q1, which knocked him out early. But yeah, Pastor Maldonado made it all the way to Q3, qualifies second, and then hey ho, Lewis gets disqualified for not having enough fuel, and he's put on pole. This was a fascinating race to watch because we'd had at this point there'd been a different winner in every race, and then we had and then he became the 6th or the 7th different winner that season. Yeah, but the rest of them had been like Ferrari, McLaren, Red Bull had been the front runners, not this car, which was just a midfield one. But the strategy was done well. They were fair. They were just quite safe with it. The pit stops all worked. He lost the lead at the start to Alonso, which he kind of expected to do. But then he was able to undercut him in the first sector, which was in the first stint, helped by the fact that Alonso got stuck behind Charles Pic for basically an entire lap. And in the final stint, he was being hounded by him. Kimi Räikkönen was on alternate strategy and was catching them quite rapidly, but managed to keep him behind and get that win. And a lot of people were just kind of in disbelief about this. Like, where did that come from? Because it's really, really rare to have races like that, especially dry races, where what is often a midfield car is suddenly really fast and can win against normally competitive cars. Because Vettel won in 2008, but that was in very heavy rain, and they had gone for a dry setup, which ironically enough actually works for that. Things like Olivier Panis, Monaco 96 was just everyone dropping out like flies. There are other races where people won, but they were it was mostly because of retirements and stuff, and they were ones where they could have won a lot of other races, but they themselves had mechanical problems or crashes. And so this one just stands out a lot because it was Williams' first win in 8 years, last win, how their money races since then. The big theory is the tyres that Bernie Ecclestone basically gave, because it was Frank Williams' birthday, a sort of special set of tyres that were extra durable, which is possible. And you look at that, it's like, okay, well, the tyres, the strategy was really what made the difference, and the tyres lasted well to keep the pace up. But then you think, well, that wouldn't pass through to Nero or Parc Ferme. It's like, well, it might if, the garage catches fire and burns everything down, which it did right after the race. So it's a few funny things because it doesn't. There are other races where they were competitive, but not like we can win this race competitive, just like we could get points if I don't crash.
Right. So I'll debunk a lot of these theories, and I'll get into the first reason for me why this was not like a suspicious win in any way was, well, you said that the race was won on strategy. I don't believe it was, because although yes, they didn't pit on the same laps every single time. They weren't fully congruent with strategies. They were fairly similar. I think I'm pretty sure it was the same tires. It was like I can't remember what the exact, like, if it was a soft, medium, soft, or whatever. But it was like it was the same tires every single time. Just a few laps of discrepancy. Although Alonso did get held up by Charles Pic. I'm not sure how much that would have lost him, probably about 2 or 3 seconds. But Maldonado also had a slow pit stop. He had a slow pit stop, which I believe was about 5 seconds. I think it was his second stop. So in terms of bad luck, they both had about the same. It was if it was anything more than that, it made maybe a second in Alonso's favour. And to administer the tyres point, and to administer something was going on with the car. For me, if I was Williams or if I was Williams or the FIA, or I was both, and I wanted to collude to something like that, I'd give the tyres to these special tyres to both cars, and I'd say both drivers. Well, because also Senna had come off the back of a couple of good performances. He had, I think it was like 7th in Sepang, 7th, I believe, in China as well. And think about it, Bruno Senna winning at Spain in a Williams. don't get me wrong, Spain wasn't a particularly heroic track for Ayrton. But a Senna winning a Formula One race would have been a much, much more prevalent storyline than it would have been some random Venezuelan kid winning a race. And although he was crash prone, like, yes, it would have been, the crash prone nut job finally gets a good win. It wouldn't have been as much of a prevalent story. For me, I'd have given them to both drivers, both these magic tires, to both drivers. And you'd also do it because not doing that would raise suspicion, and it would, like, the discrepancies. If those discrepancies were because of tires, people have now said that's what it could be. So you'd actively counter against that. Like, I don't know of any. You mentioned that Senna might have had problems in Q1, and that might have been the case, and that's why he didn't get out. I when I was making my spreadsheets, I didn't see it, but maybe that's just because I wasn't looking for it. What I'd say to it is, if Senna truly had that pace and it was just locked behind these problems he had, I'd have said that he would have made up loads of positions in the race. He would have made his way through the pack, and before he had that crash with Schumacher, he would have been in. He was in the top 10, but it was due to strategy. It was because he'd not pitted and everyone else had, and that's why Schumacher was hounding him. He was trying to get by. I think he was stuck behind him for about a lap and couldn't get by because he just couldn't make the overtake possible, and then he ploughed into him into turn 1. For me, if that car was truly on another level, or it was the fastest car, or it was the second fastest car, or the third fastest car, it would have shown that level of performance with Senna as well as Maldonado. And the fact that Bruno showed he had his second worst qualifying position all year. And for me, I'd expect more than that. And for me, that proves that there was nothing awry. Like, and you talk about the fire and stuff. It was Senna's car that set on fire after the race, not Pastor's. And we've seen the photos. Pastor carrying his, I believe it was his nephew, who's now also a racing driver, carrying him on his back as he left the pit garage that was full of black smoke. Like, don't get me wrong, Bernie Eccleston is a pretty sketchy guy. He's done some very, not deplorable things, but he's done some very lewd and shady business deals. But I don't think he would put people's family members and put engineers and people into genuine grave danger just to like clear up evidence or to try and dispel any sort of rumors of foul play. I believe that Williams was the 5th fastest car because it's about the average of where Pastor and Bruno were in terms of raw pace. And I believe that Pastor, we'd seen this. We'd seen this in 2011. There were races where he qualified 7th, qualified 8th, qualified 9th in what was the 9th quickest car, in a car that was a lot less flexible in terms of where it would qualify. I believe that Pastor just pulled out a fantastic lap. I mean, in Q3, it wasn't actually the best lap. He was like 2 tenths off his Q2 lap. But I believe that he managed to pull out just a good performance, and then in the race, just soaked up the pressure. I believe that in one of your videos, I believe you ranked every one-time winner in Formula One history. I'm not sure if it was in terms of the career, but in terms of the actual races. But you put Pastor at the top because I do believe that of all of the one-time race winners, he is the best and the one that. You talk about circumstances. You've got Fernando Alonso on home turf in a Ferrari, which, although, don't get me wrong, that Ferrari was not the fastest car, it wasn't the worst, and it was definitely better than the Williams. So to soak up all that pressure and not make any mistakes, and towards the end of the race, Alonso completely dropped off, and I believe he finished about 6 seconds behind. To soak up that pressure, not make any mistakes, no lockups, no nothing, for me, proves that it was not suspicious in any way of these special tyres, or people also believe that they colluded because they wanted to get 5 winners in 5 races, not realising that Hamilton hadn't won yet, Raikkonen hadn't won yet, Webber hadn't won yet, guys who are a lot more prevalent in Formula One and a lot more storied and successful hadn't won yet, and it would have been a lot more plausible to say, oh, Raikkonen's won or Hamilton's won if they wanted to conspire and make this some sort of crazy legendary season opening.
Okay, so yeah, with the one-time winners ranking, that was based on the races themselves rather than the drivers or their overall careers. And I put him. A lot of the reason I put him at number 1, well, partly because he won it from pole and led from the front, rather than Gasly, where it's like it took a red flag and a bunch of penalties and Stroll being useless to give him.
Or John and Lacey, where there was like loads of retirements or whatever.
Yeah. Well, his was Schumacher's transmission died for like 2 minutes or something.
Yeah.
And also just vibes as well, because everyone remembers it so much. But I think if this theory is true, it wasn't just Bernie involved, because it would have been Bernie like, oh, this is your present, we'll give you these tyres and can do well. Chavez himself probably would have been quite invested in wanting to see Pastor win for the pride of the nation, and also because he's investing a lot of money in him and was very close friends of him. Considering who he was, it wouldn't surprise me if he could have, slipped someone in the paddock that could have left a cigarette end or a matchstick somewhere rather than Bernie himself. There is, because I know that there were accusations at the time. People were looking at this and were like, why are they suddenly so fast? Alex Wirtz was like a team consultant or something like that at the time, and he claimed that they'd been trying these new brake ducts, which were helping with reducing tyre temperatures and making the tyres last longer. But then it's like, okay, so you've done that, but then why didn't they repeat this in Monaco? Because in Monaco, he crashed at the start, and you'd think it very quickly went back to the pecking order being basically as it was, which either means they used these brake ducts only once, thinking, oh, great, we've won a race, let's never use them again. Or everyone else upgraded their brakes, and it created an identical pecking order for the rest of the season.
It's partly that, because I didn't actually know about these brake ducts. I do know that Williams and Wirtz has talked about this, about how they learn how to heat the tyres via the wheel rim, which I don't particularly know, I have any knowledge about in terms of engineering wise, but apparently that's what they did. They learn how to heat the tyres better. I'm not sure if it was like, oh, it makes it cooler or works in a better operating window or just heats them up quicker. But essentially that's what Wirtz said had done. And then he said that from Monaco onwards, every team copied it. So it basically nullified any advantage they had. And we'll get into Monaco now. I may as well address it, because he did start last and he did plough into the back of Pedro de la Rosa in a pretty, I wouldn't say stupid, but very like, if you're starting at the back in Monaco, you're not going to make up 8 positions at turn 1. Just let's just rein it back in a bit. But he had done well in qualifying. He qualified, I believe, in 8th place, but he got a 10th place grid penalty because for some reason in FP3, he cut across Perez at the Portier corner. He'd basically Perez was on a slow down lap, Pastor was going by, and for some reason he turned across him from Perez's angle. It looks like he just come straight across him for no reason, and he got a 10th place grid penalty for that. But I don't see why he got it. I don't see why you have a 10th place grid penalty for colliding with Perez, because Perez got no damage. There was no damage, or I've just forgotten how to speak. Sorry about that. There was no repercussions, if you will, for Perez, and that it was actually.
It's something similar to the rules of driving on the road about how you pass and fail your driving test. Is that if you haven't made contact with that person, or you haven't caused them to slow down or change direction by your accidents, it's kind of harmless.
Yes.
And with Formula One, it's like, well, it's practice, and no one's on a hot lap, so why does it matter what happens unless you actually drive into them?
Yes.
I have quite a liberal approach when it comes to penalties, that really the penalties start when there's actual contact, and also intentional contact.
I mean, he did make contact. There was contact. He cut across him. But also, fun fact, that penalty, that 10th place grid penalty, was the last time that a driver had been awarded a 10th place grid penalty for something other than engine car components, until Behrman got that at the Monaco Grand Prix this year.
What did Behrman do again?
Overtook under red flags.
Oh, again, well, that one was bullshit, because it was just after the red flag had thrown, and also it's you could see the footage, how much he'd slowed down, and also it's that's another one with red flags and stuff. But if you're overtaking, it's practice, so it's not a race, and you're nowhere near whatever's caused the red flag. Why is that a problem? This is just another case of maybe just using a bit of common sense. Maybe they should start using AI to do the penalty decisions. AI race stewards could be fun.
That would be fun. It would be entertaining to see what they'd come up with.
Yes.
But yeah, obviously Monaco was a complete write-off. I believe he did well in qualifying, and I think had he done well, had he kept that position from qualifying and not been a div in free practice or whatever, he would have got at least some points. And then in Canada, there's a theme developing of extreme highs and then not extreme lows, but he was going purple in Q2. He would have been gone easily into Q3, because it's a street circuit and he's a street circuit specialist, or a semi-permanent street circuit. He purple in sector 1. He's on course to get into Q3 on this lap he's currently on. He pushes too hard coming out of the final chicane. This is at Montreal. and spins around, hits the wall of champions, and loses his lap and qualifies 17th. He gets a he carries over his 5-place grid penalty from hitting De La Rosa, I believe, in Monaco. Either that or it was a gearbox drop. So he qualified. So he started 22nd. He climbs. He gets. I've just written a script about the 2012 Canadian Grand Prix for another video I'm doing. So luckily, I know quite a lot about this race. He makes up 3 positions on the opening lap. He then overtakes Senna on lap 5, and by the end of the race, he is 50 seconds clear of Senna. So it was clear that he had potential to score points in that race because he had. Well, maybe I wouldn't. Well, he set a purple sector 1, but I'm not going to say he would have qualified pole and danced off into the distance. But he would have at least got I believe a rough 7th, 8th position and scored more points in that race. The amount of points that he's losing is starting to add up. Obviously, a lot of them are for his own mistakes. Australia and now Canada and Monaco. But he's had a couple of points taken away from him due to circumstances outside of his own control. And just as we say, circumstances outside of his own control, we get to the European Grand Prix at Valencia.
Yeah, this is another fondly remembered race. I mean, Valencia had been quite a dull affair since its introduction in 2008. No one really, there was very little that stood out. And then even at this point, I think it had already been decided they couldn't carry on hosting it because it was too expensive. And then we end up with this classic race, which it gets triggered. At first, there's nothing happening, and then there's a collision at one point between Verne and a Lotus, and I think there's something that happens before that sort of triggers the first safety car and makes everything go kind of crazy.
Yes,
but by the end of it, he's got. It was another collision with Lewis. They'd already had a few before this point, and Lewis was on old tires. He was on new. I think it was even for a podium, or Lewis had been on the podium and then lost that position.
Yes, it was.
And then so it would have been a podium, and then it ends up on the loss, and then they come together at turn 10,000 because there's loads of corners on that circuit on the final lap, I think, as well.
Yes.
Or final lap or penultimate lap. This is one where a lot of people put this on Maldonado, and I'm like, well, to be honest, his only other option, the 2 options that Lewis gave him, similar to a certain other chicane-based contact he had several years later with another driver, were cut the chicane or crash into him. That seemed to be the 2 options he'd been given. He chose to crash into him. And so it seemed like either way, he was kind of doomed to get penalised for that and, be denied a podium. Yeah,
this was one of obviously one of Pastor's better races, I will still say that, because he qualified 3rd. Again, people do see him as a street circuit specialist. He was very good on those street circuits, and we'll see that with his qualifying positions later on, because it continues. He qualifies 3rd. He did drop down the order a little bit, I believe. I think he might have dropped as low as 6th or 7th in the first stint, but then Vettel retires with, I believe it was an alternator failure. Grosjean retires with mechanical problems, and he's suddenly back into it. And that people say it was Alonso's fantastic win and he won on merit. It was a fantastic drive, don't get me wrong, but under normal circumstances, I don't think he'd even been on the podium because of all the mechanical faults and because of everything that was going on that race. And what you said about the incident itself between him and Lewis rings true, because what it was essentially, for those who haven't seen it, I'm not sure if we'll play a clip or something, but he's on the outside of Lewis going into what is a left-right chicane. It's a tight left-right chicane. It's an awkward left-right chicane. Sorry, right-left chicane, I've just realised. He's on the outside of him. Lewis just completely forces him off the track. He gets to the apex and then just drives like he's not there. Pastor is in this position where he can either, as you said, cut the corner or try and rejoin the circuit and hope Lewis leaves him space. This is 2012 Lewis Hamilton. Lewis Hamilton did not leave space in this era of Formula One. We've seen it with so many drivers. We saw it in 2011 with Massa, Maldonado again in Monaco, Kobayashi in Spa, where he just cut across him, even though he was still there. Lewis did not leave space in this era. And I mean, maybe you could argue Pastor was naive, but the option, as you said, was to cut the corner, get ahead of him, let him back through because it's an illegal overtake, and then go back by him, even though there was no more overtaking opportunities on the final lap of the race. Like, you're just not going to do that. Like, when it comes to consideration and thinking for the future, it goes out the window on the final lap. Had this been the second to last lap, I could have somewhat agreed because you got one more opportunity. But I do genuinely believe that it was just a stupid. And then Pastor somehow got a penalty for it. I don't see how Pastor got a 20-second time penalty, which dropped him out because he had no front wing, managed to crawl back to the end, finish in 10th place. That 20-second time penalty knocked him out of the points. I don't see how he got the penalty, because people say like unsafe rejoin, but he was forced off a circuit completely and was given no avenue to rejoin without doing so illegally. So I don't
know if it was much of a rejoin because he never went off, in the sense that I don't think he had all four wheels go off the track. But even so, there was no.
He did, but it was like maybe like half a foot. It wasn't like masses off the circuit. He got beached on the curb coming back on. That's what stopped. Had there not been no curb there, he would have been on just fine, I believe.
Yeah, same as another race with a Hamilton collision. That get rid of those bloody sausage curbs and it would have been fine. But yeah,
I mean, it wasn't a sausage curb with Maldonado, but yeah, it's just so frustrating because that's 15 points lost. Like you talked about his points tally at the beginning, where he was like 45 total points, 25 of those came from Spain. Add 15 points onto that, suddenly his points tally looks a lot better. Then after that, so after Europe, we get on to Silverstone, where he qualifies 7th, is running in that position right in the opening stint, and then for some reason he's battling side by side with Perez, makes a mistake under braking into, I believe it was Brooklands, and just clouts straight into the side of him. His own fault completely, and he didn't retire from that race, but he basically lost his entire run. You were at that race, weren't you?
I was, yeah. I mean, I was at Stowe, so that was happening at the complete opposite end of the circuit from where I was. But we would have seen it on the TV screens and everything. But yeah, I remember seeing that. I remember Perez was not very. He had some quite not very friendly words to say about him, because again they'd had coming together before this already, and
in Monaco, yeah,
and probably had in GP2 and everything as well, because they debuted the same year in Formula One and both Latin American and blah blah blah. So yeah, they had a bit of history.
So then we get past Silverstone again. Don't get me wrong. I will defend Pastor for all of his because he clearly had a lot of pace. These times he's up in the top 10, he's up in the top 5, he's up in the top 3. But then he does have just these stupid moments where, not necessarily stupid, but like he does just lock up and go straight into the side of Perez. Then you get Germany or Hockenheim. He outqualifies Senna by 2 seconds in Q2, qualifies 6th, Senna is 16th. He ends up finishing 15th. I believe it might have been, I don't know what the exact reason was. I believe it might have been that he was on a 2-stop and Senna was on a 3-stop or something like that. But the car didn't end up going well, but he still finished half a minute ahead of Senna. You've got Hungary, where he again qualifies in 8th position. That's actually 1 place ahead of Senna, and I believe that might have been Senna's only ever Q3 appearance in 2012. And he finishes 10th. He would have finished 10th, but he got I believe he got some sort of penalty, because I think it was a drive-through penalty for forcing the rest off the track. Literally what happened was he was on the inside of him going into, Raikkonen corner, the one where Raikkonen drifted and passed Ericsson. He was on his inside going into that corner, completes the move, but Di Resta goes off circuit because he gets not necessarily forced off, but Pastor had completed the move and Paul got just forced off. Pastor got a drive-through penalty for that. It was it was like in 2013. I think Grosjean at Hungary got a drive-through penalty for going like that far off a track limits. It was that kind of thing. And then you get to Spa.
Yeah, Spa was one of the more significant races in 2012. Only for the first lap, really, because the rest of the race was fairly uneventful. Because in terms of where things were looking in the championship, like Vettel had gotten knocked out in Q2, and like Hamilton, Alonso, everyone else, they were at the front. But then Grosjean, comes in like a wrecking ball, takes them all out. That means that Vettel salvages the championship because he finishes second, while Hamilton and Alonso are both out. Maldonado sort of indirectly was involved in that because he jumped the start.
Yes.
So he qualified, and he jumped it in an extremely obvious manner, having qualified 6th. And I mean, sometimes, no one else jumped the start, but you might say sometimes it might be a bit distracting. It puts him out of position in the sense that he would have ended up being further forward than you would think, going to turn 1, so it might crowd things a bit. But then it was Grosjean who did his usual thing, the same move he did in 2020 that nearly got him killed, of just not looking in his mirrors and pushing Lewis off. Maldonado himself he was involved. He got hit relatively lightly in a similar manner to Kobayashi, who had qualified 2nd and had his race wrecked by that. And then the damage was too much by the end. But yeah, either way, he would have been penalised quite severely for that jump start. but maybe points could have been possible if he had just not been hit at turn 1.
So yeah, I'll quickly make some points on this. So he'd actually qualified third, but he got a free-place grid penalty for impeding Nico Hulkenberg in Q2. No, actually, no, it was in Q1. This is what confused me. He got a free-place grid penalty for impeding Hulkenberg. Hulkenberg got through to Q2, and it didn't affect his actual position. So he got.
Was Hulkenberg on a hot lap?
Yes.
Right. Yeah. It's this again is something where I think there's a degree of common sense that if it doesn't, you've impeded a lap, but it's a lap that doesn't. All the lap needs to do is get you to the next session. It doesn't determine your grid spot.
Yes.
If Hulkenberg had been eliminated in Q2, it's like, okay, yes, you've obviously impeded them, but otherwise it's like, who cares? This again is the whole common sense element of Formula One that needs to be employed.
Yeah. So he did get involved in the accident at turn 1. But he dropped to 20th place, I believe, and was making his way through the back markers. Tried to move on Timo Glock. Glock turned in on him, and he lost his front wing and went down the escape road at Lacombe and retired. I believe that obviously I think he would have got a drive-through penalty for that jump start, because I think that was the given penalty for jump starts back in the day. But I still think he could have got at least, because it was weird, because Button and I believe whoever finished second in that race, Vettel, I think it was, they were quite far clear, I believe, of everyone else. It might have been that Button was far clear of everyone else, and then Vettel was about 20 seconds behind.
The gaps in general were quite large.
But Raikkonen finished third, Hulkenberg finished fourth. These aren't particular drivers who were fantastic. I believe that Pastor still could have got a top 5, maybe even a podium still.
Everyone was very out of position after that first crash. There's a video which I've used a lot on older videos. Somebody filmed Eau Rouge on the first lap, and just after that crash, and you can see everyone coming through 1-3, and like, okay, so and so's there, and blah blah blah, and they obviously gained a lot from this. But yeah, the that crash he had with Glock, I don't think it was caught on the cameras on the feed originally. Yeah, but he was already at the back. Without that, the penalty would have come. He might just have scraped 10th, but it's hard to say, because that would have put him. He was already at the back of the grid, and that then would have put him quite far behind everybody. So his only saving grace is the circuit is so long that it would have taken a very long time to get lapped.
Yeah,
it's hard to say.
I think without the entire Grosjean thing, he would have been on for a podium. With that involved, but without the Glock spin, I believe, maybe 9th, 10th place, that sort of range. But again, that's another lost podium. We're talking about, as we talked about those points. We've lost just from Valencia and from Spa. That's 30 points potentially. Maybe we'll say 25 if you want to say a top 5 instead of a podium, because that's maybe a bit optimistic. But you see where it's coming from. And then you go to Monza. He qualifies in 12th place, 2 places ahead of Senna, but takes a 10-place grid penalty, I believe, because it's carried over from his jump start. Again, 10-place grid penalty for a jump start that ended up not affecting anything is a bit stupid. He ends up as a 10-place grid penalty, so he started 22nd. He ends up finishing 0.5 seconds behind Senna, right behind him. And then you get to Singapore.
Yep, Singapore, another good one. He qualified second, front row with Lewis. Lewis, before the race, was sort of put out a plea for him to basically behave himself at turn 1, and he did. But then both him and Lewis had gearbox failures, so that the mechanical thing put him out of it. When if his had survived, maybe he could have won, because I don't know if he was in the lead when it happened, but it was Vettel that went on to win that race, and there were a couple of safety cars as well. But Singapore, as we all know, overtaking is not easy. Again, it's a street circuit, and as we've seen, he seemed to work well at street circuits. He said the reason was, quote, big balls was why he was good at them. But I think it could just be that he's good at low speed corners and that sort of thing, which you'll find in a lot of street circuits, and that's what did it. So that there's a potential win there, but yeah, it wasn't to be because of the gear.
So I'll just make a couple of points. So yeah, he qualified second. He was running third when his hydraulics failed. So a podium would have been on, and I think he retired after Lewis. So I don't think he'd have won. I think winning is a bit far-fetched, but he could have definitely got a podium. And as I said, I'm going to keep mentioning this. Points. 45 points now we're coming up to in terms of lost points from these incidents. Gets to Suzuka. Suzuka's actually, although yes, there were crashes at the start, Grosjean conveniently involved in another crash at the start. It was actually a pretty standard race for him. He qualifies in 14th, but manages to make it up to 8th by the end, half a minute clear of Senna. Korea is a similar sort of story, except he doesn't get any points. He gets 14th. He's kind of nowhere. Then you get to India. He qualifies in the top 10 yet again. He is battling with Senna and Kobayashi, I believe, and then so coming into, I believe there's in the second sector at India, there's the left right left section, if you remember that.
Just before Curry Bolliker, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
That's
yeah,
his name.
Yeah. So they're going into there. Kobayashi is in the I'd say 3/4 of the way to the right of the circuit. Maldonado's in the middle trying to complete an overtake. He thought that Kobayashi had taken the racing line because it's you go on the far right hand side of the circuit to curve in for the left. But he hadn't come across, so he cut across him and got a puncture. Ended up finishing, I believe, 16th that day. When he could have been on for at least a couple of points, not podiums or anything, but he could have been on for a couple of points. And then you get to Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, another one where, well, it was kind of mixed fortunes. He again had qualified well. This was a race. This is the only time that Abu Dhabi has produced a banger that wasn't a title decider, even though not even many of the title deciders were bangers either. Because again, championship, very, very consequential one, because Vettel got disqualified from qualifying and had to start from the pit lane, but then made this drive to third. Maldonado qualified third, so that would have been fourth without Vettel's penalty. And he finished in fifth, so he finally got some points, but he'd had a collision with Mark Webber midway through the race, which took Webber out. Or that was Grosjean that did. No, that was Grosjean.
It was Grosjean.
There was a collision with somebody, I think, at some point.
You're correct. It was with Webber. But basically what happened was, going into the old what is now the long left-hander, what then was the jutty chicane and the left-hander. Basically, Webber's trying to pass Maldonado with DRS. He gets in front under braking, but just cuts straight across him. And it was completely, like, even Brundle said that's completely Webber's fault, and there was no penalty. Yeah. Also, what people don't realise, he got fifth, but he had a KERS failure in the middle of the race. He had no KERS from lap 9 onwards. So without that, again, I believe that he was in third place when the KERS failed, and he did drop back quite a bit because people were just passing him on the straights, and I'm assuming it was because of the KERS. I think that was another lost podium. I believe that's another 5 or 6 points that he could have gained from that. He then gets on to Kota. He has a pretty anonymous race, finishes 9th. And then Brazil. So Brazil is an odd one. He qualified 6th, which was another great qualifying from him. But he got a 10-place grid penalty for missing the weighbridge in qualifying. Again, I think that's a bit extreme. But he makes up, I think it was about 5 positions on the opening lap, and then crashes out on the second lap because he got on the white lines coming out of the Senna S and just spat straight off into the barrier.
Yeah. It wasn't a good race for either him or Senna, because Senna was the one who, I think it was Senna, or was it Maldonado that clouted
Paris?
That clouted Vettel and spun him round. I mean, to be fair, he gave us an amazing race. He still won the championship, but that wasn't ideal, and that was the end of his Formula One career. But yeah, he got that crash in. But the thing is that Senna, the pace gap is quite significant, but then Senna ended up scoring a reasonably large amount of points, because even if you think the penalties are stupid, Senna wasn't getting penalised. He was keeping himself out of trouble. He wasn't cutting drivers off or doing funny things or whatever. And a lot of these penalties, you look at it and think, well, maybe it's a bit extreme, or it's like, for example, missing the weighbridge. It's like, does that necessitate a 10-second penalty? But those are the rules that you have to play by. And so he just wasn't really doing himself any favours, because there's hardly any weekends where, almost every weekend, either he drives well and gets penalised, or drives badly and doesn't get penalised. And except Spain, whereas Senna got very few penalties all season.
There is that point to be made. And obviously, he was more aggressive, and he was more flamboyant, you'd say, with the rules than a lot of other drivers. Now, I'll give you that. And there were, as I said, there were times where he was doing moronic things. But as I said, if you take the points from Valencia, where he lost points due to something where it's 50-50, or maybe slightly more as to whether it's his fault or whether it's Lewis's fault. You've got the 15 points there that he lost. You've got Belgium, where he's at least about 10, maybe 8 to 10 points. You've got Singapore, where he dropped out of the podium position. That's another 15 points. You've got Abu Dhabi, where he lost another 5 points due to those factors outside of his control. Even just those, that's ones that are not necessarily either not his fault or are arguably not his fault. That's about 50, 60 points. He would have more than doubled his points tally just off of those results. And that, I mean, I did a I've actually forgotten to go and check this, but I did a simulation where I simulated the perfect 2012 season. This is the season without any reliability problems, without any crashes, and it's basically every driver's perfect race. So, like for example, Vettel would win the European Grand Prix because he was leading when he retired. There was a couple of other races where it completely changed the order. And let me just go and get it up because I completely forgot to actually get it for this this recording. So the 2012 perfect season. So Vettel still wins a championship because he had quite a few. Although Alonso had stuff in Suzuka and in Spa where he lost points, Vettel had Valencia. He had a couple of other races where he was completely out of it due to factors outside of his control. But Pastor ended up finishing 8th in the driver's standings, which is a marked improvement on what he got in real life. I think he got 15th in real life. And in this simulation, bearing in mind it's other drivers getting better results as well, he ended up getting a total of 110 points, which is, again, more than double what he got in real life. So don't get me wrong, there were stupid moments. There was Monaco, where he just decided to run straight into the back of De La Rosa. There was Britain, where he just ran straight into the side of Perez. There was a lot of other races where he did stupid stuff, and I'm prepared to admit that was the case. But when he was in those truly like really high positions, like Valencia, like Singapore, like Abu Dhabi, like Spain, he executed pretty well. And this is part of the reason why I think he would have been a future champion. We'll get into 2013, 14, and 15 in a second. But in those moments where he had all the pressure on, he actually performed better than he did when he was just fighting in the midfield or fighting for minor points positions. And as I said, like if we use Spain 2012 as a default, I know we've got a sample size of 1 when it comes to races where he was in contention for a win. But he made no lockups. He had the hardest situation of any driver who's ever been going for their first win ever had, and made no mistakes and won against Alonso, who, although we can argue the toss about where the Williams was in terms of performance, and we've already done that. But the Ferrari, I think we can all agree the Ferrari was slightly, if not masses better, slightly better, and he managed to just about beat him. It was in the end by like 6 or 7 seconds. So with that one result, I know it's one result, but I think that in terms of maturity, I think especially if he was in a World Championship winning car, he dialed down his aggression. He wouldn't get involved in those needless incidents in the midfield. I believe that he knew that car, like, don't get me wrong, it was better than the 8th place in the Constructors' Championship made out. But I think he realised that unless he pushed 100% or 110%, he wasn't going to get much out of it. As he said, like we saw with Senna, I think his best result was, 7th. He knew that, and it proved because he got more points than Senna, getting a win and a couple of other, even with his only a couple of other points, he demolished Senna in the point standings. And with those other results, he would have absolutely destroyed him more so than he did in actual fact. So don't get me wrong, his incidents came because he was pushing too hard. But then again, you could argue his wins, his near podiums, and his good results also came because he was pushing very hard and because that's just how he drove. And even like hit or miss in those midfield cars, as you could see, it proved better results than what Senna got. So, I mean, as I said, I think he would be a lot less aggressive. Maybe not less aggressive in wheel-to-wheel conduct with his rivals, with his top rivals, but he would be making less needless errors, I believe, in a championship situation. We can get into 2013 onwards, but that's part of the reason why I believe he would have been a future champion.
Yeah, I suppose it depends on the nature of the title fight, because he seems like the kind of person that would do lots of silly stuff if things weren't going his way. He'd need to be very fortunate to get access to a car where he can just cruise to it and doesn't need to worry and can just win every race. If there's a title on the line, he's probably going to be a bit argy-bargy. If he's going to be that argy-bargy just fighting for like lower points or whatever in real life.
Yes. I believe that if he'd have gone against like a Hamilton or an Alonso or a Vettel, I believe that it would have been like a Hamilton Rosberg situation. I think he would get beaten maybe 8 times out of 10, but he might pull together like a decent enough season to be able to win once out of like 5 seasons that their teammates. But if he had someone like, I don't know, I know Massa wasn't the great in that era, but if we had like prime Felipe Massa or let me think of other drivers from that era who Hulkenberg's not really a good option, but someone like Button in that era, Perez, those kind of guys, those guys who weren't necessarily on that top champions level, but those guys who are on that next level. I'm not suggesting Button's on the same level as Perez. It was just no particular order kind of things. But if he had one of those teammates who didn't have that necessarily that raw pace or was slightly inconsistent like Massa was in his prime, that I believe in that situation it'd be more favourable for him. We can get onto those future seasons now if you want.
Yeah, I think so, because after he basically peaked at this point, and it just Williams. I mean, 2013 ended up being almost indistinguishable from 2011 in lots of ways for Williams.
I mean, it was the same constructors position and the same points total, I believe, as well. 5 points in both of those seasons. I think Bottas was a rookie, but I don't believe he was one of those rookies that took a long while to acclimatise to Formula One. I mean, he got third in qualifying in Montreal. So, and that was 7 races into the season. I believe he was pretty on. He was pretty on because he'd also. This is something we didn't mention with Senna. He'd taken part in, I believe, 15 free practice 1 sessions during 2012. Now that could have explained a lot of Senna's like lack of pace, or some of it. But then again, it doesn't explain some of the gaps that he had to pass them. But yeah, Bottas was pretty ready for Formula One by the time he got in. He was a GP3 champion. He hadn't actually gone to GP2. He'd just gone straight from GP3 to Williams reserve driver or test driver role, and then got put in that second seat in 2013. Pastor had the upper hand for the first couple of races while Bottas was getting acclimatized. Sorry, not accumulated. But in the mid-season, he started to claw back an advantage. And there were races like Germany where he was driving extremely well. Like he got 15th and finished 40 seconds ahead of Bottas. He had Monaco again. He out-qualified Bottas by 1.2 seconds and then had that incident with Chilton in the race. And again, he was very good in qualifying in some of these instances, but ended up only scoring 1 point in Hungary. I believe he could have been on for more in other races. But I think because Bottas got that one really good result in Kota where Pastor was off pace all weekend and he somehow got 8th position at Williams, I think it made a lot of people think that Bottas was better in 2013, when if you take the averages of every single race they both finished or every single qualifying they both did, they both had no problems in, and races where they had no problems in. Pastor was 1/10 slower in qualifying actually, but in the races was 3.5 seconds on average quicker than Bottas. Now, I know it's a rookie, it's Valtteri Bottas, who he then later said in that the Beyond the Grid podcast episode, that he didn't really rate Bottas, which, considering he only beat him by a small margin, maybe makes it a bit embarrassing for him. But a rookie Valtteri Bottas is not a bad driver. I'd probably put him on the same level or similar level to what Barrichello was in 2011.
I mean, Bottas, yeah, okay, he'd skip GP2 and all that, which these days doesn't happen. Well, no, it doesn't happen. I was going to say Antonelli, but he didn't skip.
I mean, that was 10 years ago.
Yeah, but Max is Max. Bottas is that he hadn't... So he was... In 2012, he wasn't racing, but he did FP1 almost every race that year.
Yeah, 15
so,
times.
Yeah, that's a lot of testing mileage in the era of testing bans, when you think these days they have to beg for the slightest scraps of time, and then teams like Alpine wonder why, when they keep swapping drivers out all the time, and the same with Red Bull, and they suck immediately. It's like, yeah, because they haven't driven the bloody car. That's why. So he'd had plenty of preparation. I mean, that third place qualifying was done in the rain, so that's always going to have an effect, because in normal conditions he probably would have been out in Q1. But yeah, the car just wasn't brilliant, and it's just, I mean, as seasons go, it was just so dog shit and very hard to remember anything other than the tyres were useless, or useless enough that half of them exploded in Silverstone, and then Vettel just won everything once they changed the tyres up. It's otherwise just a very quiet season, and one where somehow they'd messed it up that badly. Like, when there wasn't really much that changed car-wise, the regulations didn't really change at all. It was the tyres that changed.
I think the only thing that really changed was the step noses. They'd kind of gone. And yeah, 25. I think Ace might have said this in one of our previous episodes. If they'd have not been so trigger happy to react to Silverstone, it could have been a much better season, because like the first half of 2013, you had what Hamilton won in Hungary. You had, I know that was after the whole debacle, but you had Hamilton in Hungary. Rosberg had won a couple of races. Vettel had. Webber should have in Malaysia. Alonso had won a couple. Raikkonen had won one. It's getting on for some good action, and then Vettel just goes on and wins the last 9 races. But I mean, if 2013 was forgettable, 2014, yes, you have the title battle, but aside from that, in terms of its entertainment, I don't think it was really one of the better ones, especially with the new engines.
Well, yeah, 2014 is just a really depressing season because they're like, oh, it's a new era. You know, we're going to change things up. Because 2013, there was, and even as a Vettel fan, there was a sense of fatigue. I was finding very early on. I mean, even the second race when it was with Vettel's antics in the multi-21 thing, it's like, okay, this is happening because he knows he's beaten him for the past 4 seasons as teammates. He knows he can do it, so he's just going to walk all over Mark and do that. And it's like, okay, it's the fastest again. We're going to have 4 seasons in a row of him being the fastest, which these days happens more often than it did at the time. And then we get to 2014, it's like, oh, these new hybrids and turbos, and that's all back, and we're changing things. And it's like, oh, the cars are fuck ugly. They sound awful. They're also really slow. They don't have any grip. The feel has moved around a bit because, you know, Mercedes are fast now and Red Bull suck. But like even the back markers, Marussia and Caterham are bloody useless and all of that. And there were some new drivers, but it was a very mid grid as well, and most of the races just weren't good either.
Yeah.
So it was just, and then Bianchi died, or nearly, well, not quite died, but you know, and so it was just, it was just a really depressing season, and there's not much about it that like is good, because I'm not going to be one of these people that say Simpsons like, oh no, it was great because Ricciardo won races. Like, I don't care. Like, no, it's just, yeah.
If we're focusing on Maldonado, there were a couple of standout performances. Because that 2014 Lotus, I mean, he may as well have been driving a milk float. I mean, come on. The double tusk nose design was by far one of the worst things I've ever seen in my entire life.
Asymmetrical tusks
asymmetrical
as well.
because only one of them was allowed to be the crash, like the crash structure or something to that bollocks.
Yeah, the forward crash structure. Yeah.
Yeah. So there was that. So there were a couple of standout performances, as I said. He demolished Grosjean in Austria, qualified 7 times ahead of him in qualifying, and then finished that's a minute ahead of him in the race, finishing in 12th. And then there was Monza, where he was 36 seconds ahead after qualifying somewhat ahead. And then in Kota, he qualifies a second ahead and is ahead in the race. This is 2014 Lotus for you. They only finished 6 races without any sort of issues together. So there's not much to go off in terms of sample size. But again, this is a theme that I've started to develop. Like, Maldonado showed great qualifying form in 2011 and 12, and maybe less race form. But from 2013 onwards, it was the opposite. He lost his qualifying edge, but in the races had started to improve. So as I said, he beat Bottas on average in the races despite losing out in the qualifying. But then in 2014, it was the same thing. He was on average 2/10 slower than Grosjean in every single qualifying session. But in the races they both finished, he was 13.3 seconds ahead on average, which is the biggest margin we've had so far, other than Senna. And even then, actually, no, Senna on average, he was 2 seconds ahead in the races. But there was a lot of times where Pastor got taken out of those performances. But in the 2014 was an anonymous year. I think it wasn't. I think it was actually Pastor's worst season, but I wouldn't say it was terrible, but it just wasn't very standout. But then you get to 2015. The Lotus is slightly better. They have Mercedes engines, and it's just like it's better in terms of performance. And Pastor does have a couple of standout moments, more so than 2014. There was Austria, where, I mean, there's videos of him having what I call a Titanic battle with a rookie Max Verstappen, where there's the clip of him where Max, I believe he moved on the straight and Pastor had to duck out of the way at the last minute. He had his DRS open, so it made his car nearly spear to the left-hand side, but he caught it and then managed to keep the car under control. And then Verstappen goes deep at turn 1. There were a couple of other great parts of that battle. But in that race, even with that battle, he outqualified. Let me just double check because I've got it on a different picture here. Hold on a second. So in that race, he was Oh, Grosjean didn't finish. Of course he didn't. So we can't actually see how good he was in comparison. He also had Canada, where he was half a minute ahead of Grosjean. Monaco, where he got into Q3 when Grosjean didn't. There was, and then towards the end of the season, he actually became sort of a kind of a best of the rest figure. He finished 8th, 7th, 8th, and was on course for a couple of other good results. Again, I calculated that in terms of lost points that he lost due to reliability problems, he lost about 33 points due to that, and that would have put him ahead of Grosjean in the standings. On average, like he says in the races they both finished, he was behind by about 12 seconds, but they only finished 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 races together the entire season without any sort of issues. Again, Lotus. And I do still think it was one of Pastor's best seasons because I think he finished the same amount of races in the points in 2015 than he did in 2012. And the 2015 Lotus was definitely worse than the 2012 Williams. He was more consistent. I think he had finally. Don't get me wrong. He still had some dumb moments where he went off in practice or he had silly mistakes. But I think he had a lot more maturity. And for example, he got involved in a couple of instances of other drivers, but they were, for the first time ever, pretty much, they were unequivocally the other driver's fault, like we saw with Verstappen in Austria. He had a collision with Button in China, which was so obviously Button's fault. It was unreal. I think he just ran straight into the back of him, that sort of thing. And Pastor, I believe, had finally sort of like matured in terms of knowing which battles to concede to and which battles to have. And I believe that if he was to find his 2012 form in terms of pace and combine that with his 2015 form in terms of maturity, I believe that he would have gone on to have a lot better career because, again, he had his second best season, in my opinion, and then just fell off the grid. It was because I believe he put out an announcement saying, "Oh, I'm leaving Formula One," which a lot of drivers do when they're just being forced out of a drive and they don't want to officially say they're retired. So they say, "Oh, I'm leaving Formula One," and they go off and do their other thing in endurance racing or whatever. But there were rumours of him going to Manor that never materialised, or rumours of him going to Sauber that never materialised. We haven't talked about other moves that could have happened in previous years. In 2014, back end of 2013, Stefano Domenicali, who was the team principal of Ferrari at the time, wanted to bring Pastor to Ferrari, I believe. I'm not sure if it was because of the sponsorship money or because he would have been a teammate to Alonso because they were trying to get rid of Massa. Two Spanish-speaking drivers could have easily taken over the Spanish market for any sort of sponsorship. They could have built off of his 2012 form because that's what they were focusing on. They weren't focusing on his 2013, they were focusing on his 2012. But then Domenicali left Ferrari. The new guys didn't really want Pastor, so it never materialised. He was in talks, I believe, to take over because both Di Resta and Sutti were replaced after 2013 at Force India. I believe that he was going to either take over Perez's or what ended up being Hulkenberg's seat. Never materialised. His manager, Nicholas Tott, who was related to John Tott, useless. He never got him any of the drives he wanted. He had to settle with a last minute settle for Lotus. When I believe had he had someone who was properly fighting in his corner, I believe he could have got that Ferrari drive, even if it was for 1 or 2 seasons. And I mean, if you're a Ferrari driver, you do just get your career extended unless you're utterly awful. I believe that he could have gone to Haas, he could have gone to Sauber, Manor, and possibly extended to about 2019, 2020, his career. And I believe we could have seen a lot more of him because I believe he had matured a little bit. And I genuinely believe that, as I said, if you combine his 2012 pace and his 2012 raw speed with his 2015 maturity and actually not getting involved in as many incidents, I believe that was a champion potential. It's not Lewis Hamilton winning 1 million championships potential. It's not Sebastian Vettel dominate 1 million championships potential. It's not Alonso dragging bad cars to titles. But it's honestly, but I would have put that kind of Maldonado on a similar level to a Jenson Button, maybe not a Nico Rosberg. No, maybe slightly lower than Nico Rosberg's level, maybe on that Jenson Button level, on that slightly higher than Sergio Perez, those kind of upper midfield guys like Hulkenberg. But I believe he didn't really get the full shot F1 that he deserved. I believe that he had his reputation basically destroyed by the fact that everyone saw him as a pay driver, everyone saw him as a crash-prone nut job, everyone saw him as an idiot who just didn't know what he was doing. When, in fact, when he was in those big moments, like Monaco 2011, where he took a really bad car to a really good result, or was going to, Spain 2012, where he did finally deliver on his potential, all those races in 2012 where he was taken out of those good results due to factors outside of his control, he did show that he had that potential. And even when he was reining himself in 2015, it wasn't like he was reining himself in terms of maturity, in terms of racecraft, just and it was detrimental to his pace. He was still fast, but I believe he could have stayed on for at least a little bit longer in F1, and we could have got a better picture of how good he actually was.
Okay, so in this hypothetical universe where he becomes a champion, I think it's on the basis of finding himself in the right place at the right time, similar to people like Villeneuve and Button and whatnot.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but yeah, him leaving, I think by that point, a lot of people were like, well, I kind of had enough, because even if he had a lot of good races and speed, he had just developed a reputation as a crasher, because the number of crashes, again, started going up in 2015, mostly in practice rather than races. But even if they weren't necessarily his fault, he seemed to always find himself in those situations. And you can only assume that he'd do that more and more when he's fighting at the front for race wins and for championships. Because you can compare it to Verstappen, who's himself a driver in his career. He's had a lot of crashes. He's had collisions with other drivers. He gets argy-bargy, but still not nearly as many as Maldonado. And that always has an effect, because it just seems that he seems to just attract trouble. And sometimes, yes, it was bad reliability, but it also didn't help him at the same time. And I think by 2015, there were a lot of retirements. Reliability, curiously enough, it was a Mercedes power unit that's still having problems. But he was outscored by Grosjean. Grosjean, of course, did get that podium in Spa, although it was revealed, actually, the conspiracy is true, that he was given party mode by Mercedes so that he could chase down Vettel, and Vettel got that puncture, so it worked. But he would have just... Yeah, it's quite a stretch to see him in a front-running team. I think he would have ended up kind of... He has... Sounds realistic, maybe Sauber. He would have milled around the midfield for a few years, I think, and then eventually called it quits.
I believe his ideal F1 career, like if we're talking about true like crazy levels, I believe that if his 2004 Minardi test had have gone to anything, he could have started in 2005, maybe 2006. But I think he was a bit too young, a bit too raw for that, because he still hadn't done any of his big seasons in GP2 or in Formula Renault 3.5, sorry. So if we were to start in like 2010, let's say he takes Ciaron Chandok's seat at HRT, for example. He just drives around, because that's what any driver at HRT would have done at the time. Just drive around, and he might have caused a couple of incidents, or he might have done that, but he would have mostly just stayed at the back and done nothing. Would have probably got the Williams promotion in 2011. 2012 comes by, 2013 comes by. I believe that if that Ferrari move had gone through, even the Force India move had gone through, we would have seen him in a lot better car. One that was not only better, but better more consistently, so you could more accurately judge him against a good teammate, like whether it be a Perez or a Hulkenberg or an Alonso. You can judge him against those kind of caliber drivers. And they're not just going to, even if he has like a stinky 2014, like Raikkonen did, they wouldn't have dropped him after one season, I don't believe. I believe they'd have given him 2015. Whether Alonso would have stayed on because Maldonado was there, I don't know. Probably not. Maybe Vettel and Maldonado are together. Let's say he does have a pretty average or whatever 2015, and they want to bring in someone like a Raikkonen or an extra driver who can bring those things. Maybe he does still crash a little bit. So they just want someone to bring. He could have easily just gone to Haas, gone to Force India, maybe even again, or Sauber or somewhere like that. And I believe he could have a reasonable career could have seen him up until like 2019. And I believe he could have won a couple more races, and that would have kind of solidified his, not legacy per se, but in terms of his. It wasn't just one time in 95 races where he won. It would have been a couple more times. He would have been able to show that he wasn't just this guy who crashed all the time. And I believe that's the thing. Although he was a pay driver, it was clear that he had pace. He wasn't like an Esteban Gutierrez who had lots of Carlos Slim money. It wasn't like other drivers from that era who just brought in a bit of cash and were not kind of hapless. It was clear that, like, I think we can all agree on his day and on a lot of his days, he was just as fast as Lewis Hamilton, Sebastian Vettel, Fernando Alonso. Those guys, he was just as fast, if not faster. But it was his mentality. He did say on that Beyond the Grid episode that he would push 100%, and he would push. I can't remember exactly what he said, but he would rather push in those instances and prove himself. And he was trying to prove himself, I believe, because as I said, he was trying to prove himself. People were saying, "Oh, you're a crash prone nut job," so he was trying to prove himself and say, "Oh, I'm not." But it was just kind of snowballing. So I do believe that he would have been. It would have had to have been in a probably a dominant car, or if not a dominant car, it's one of those like 2017, 2018 situations. If the Ferrari had stayed at its, or if Ferrari and Vettel had have stayed at their peaks for every 2015 and every 2020 that he has, maybe not even for every 2015 and 2012 he has seasons like 2011, 2009 where he's just a bit stinky. But I believe he wouldn't have beaten Prime Vettel, Prime Alonso, those kind of guys. But against like a Rosberg, maybe in one of Hamilton's off seasons, maybe against other, like he would have beaten 2024 Lando Norris. I think we can all agree that.
The thing about Ferrari is that if you're going to get a seat with them, you either need to have some kind of formal connections or association with them, such as being a part of the driver academy or for one of their driving for customer teams. Or you need to basically be absolutely annihilating your teammate and prove, okay, this guy's the real deal. He could take us to titles. Or, oh, this guy looks pretty solid. He could be a good support driver for our number one. And you don't really get that with Maldonado because he doesn't have the connections to them. And he would have been, with his recklessness, he would have been utterly useless as a supporting driver and general temperament. But it just wasn't. The prestige just wasn't there because he was getting beaten. He got beaten by Grosjean, and he was beating Bruno Senna, and otherwise was just driving quite crappy cars. There wasn't really a window for him to go to Ferrari. Like as I said before, Haas, yes, completely realistic. I'm sure that he probably was considering it, or maybe he was on their list or whatever of drivers for 2016 that they would have wanted. Or he could have stuck it out when Lotus became Renault. Yes, that could have done Force India, sure. One of them, but not Ferrari.
Yeah, I get. As I said, I think it was possible because of his Domenicali connections. But if you don't, that's obviously fair enough.
It would have been very entertaining to watch. I mean, I don't know if we would have seen him title, but then sometimes it feels like almost anyone can if they have the right car because everyone's aware that there is the risk of a Stroll championship once he's got Adrian Newey machinery from 26 because who knows what's going to happen with the regs. So it's theoretically possible, but it just seems highly unlikely, and it needs a lot of things to fall into place, and it would need drivers like Hamilton and Vettel to really be off their game as well.
Yeah, I guess so. It is just because there was a big dichotomy. He was either very, 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 very good on his day, or middling, or just kind of a bit of a crash prone nut job.
Yeah, there wasn't enough of the first one, and kind of too much of the others. It was a tricky one. It's the same. I mean, Grosjean is a similar driver that he had. With him, his crashes were pretty significant. Like Maldonado had a lot of fairly small crashes for the most part. Grosjean crashed less often, but they tended to be howlers, or really mess things up for other people, or dictate championship results or something like that, or nearly get him killed. But then he also had there was a lot of good stuff in 2013, and he had a few points where he could have won races, and he had some very good moments with Haas, and that. But Pastor Maldonado, there is just less of that. It is just more, he's the one that crashes and sometimes deliberately drives into other people because they've annoyed him. He's a tricky one, but I mean, Maldonado. I mean, he's one of the most popular memes in the sport, and people love to rag on him. And he has quite a reputation compared to other midfield drivers. I don't know if this episode has helped convince people of to change their mind on what they think of him, but if you have your own thoughts about what he did or what he could have done with other teams, let us know in the comments below. You've been listening to the DRS Train podcast. We're on YouTube and Spotify, and you can find us on Instagram and X at the DRS Train podcast. Make sure to tune in for our next episode. Stay safe, and we'll see you all next time.
Bye.